Hello, everybody. Sorry for the slight delay. It's always a bit tricky to set those things up. We can see and hear. Okay, cool. And as always, there's multiple screens. It is a bit tricky to know where the things are coming from. So thanks for joining us today. Today is our last training seminar for this year, and it's the fifth in a series that we had already. Today we would like to look into how we can actually use the scenario tool to drill a bit deeper into the question of infill developments, and also what does it mean for tree cover loss, how we can simulate that, how can we simulate population growth as infill scenarios, what does it mean for heat changes, and also what does it mean on ultimately this impact that we have for the population. So we have a bit of a presentation at the start, just to give you just a high-level overview of what the tool can do. And then we're gonna dive down into a case study and just gonna explore some of those elements there. And then in the second part of the seminar, there is now material online for you as well as part of the documentation, where you can actually use the tool to explore some of those issues as well, and I kind of walk you through some of those elements there. I'm monitoring the chat at the same time, so if there's anything coming up, just post your questions there. We have also a Q&A panel, and I try to address those as we go. Now, just to start, and this is okay, next slide. It is the same challenge, I guess, across Australia, particularly around the major metropolitan centres, that we have this massive population growth to work with. So it's almost up the populations. These are just the projections that we have here for Victoria as well as for Greater Melbourne, where we're going from about, 4.5 million at the moment to about 8 million by 2051. And a lot of that should happen through infill development. So these are the scenarios that we have in a lot of places, is instead of trying to, instead of letting the city sprawl and sprawl, how can it accommodate that population? It's form of infill development. Now, we all know the prestigious project where it's kind of a lot of apartment buildings going up, and is always the good way of building a denser urban form. But we also find a lot of those examples where we have where we've previously had the typical single-family houses with their big backyards at a tree on lot, which is then basically turned into these townhouses there, where it's really about maximizing the yield, how many townhouses can be built on one individual lot. And this see has a massive impact on just increasing the impervious surfaces as well. So we get obviously more roof cover, more concrete, more straight, more driveways. And with that, we start to lose a lot of the amenity benefits that we had before. So it's going to lose that green space in the private backyard. But it also is going to have a lot of negative impacts in terms of heat, and then knock-on effects on that as well in terms of, for example, flooding and so on as well. And this is what we try to explore today. How can we actually use the scenario tool to see how we can actually simulate those impacts in the first place, but then also otherwise identifying opportunities to mitigate some of those aspects. And what I would like to show you now is a few results that we did. So we was using the scenario tool across Melbourne to understand those impacts a little bit better. So the results that you see are coming next out of the scenario tool, where we start to simulate those processes. And it just gives a bit of an idea about the nature of the problem and the context that we're talking about. What you should see on that slide now here, this is the tree cover that we currently have in Melbourne. So there's you can see there's a big difference between the west and the east, whereas in the east we get the higher tree covers, and then in the west it's getting quite dry. Now this is today's situation. And what we then simulated is on the current population projection and with the zoning that's currently allowed, how that is going to change until 2051. Now it's hard to see that when you just do the comparison side by side, but what you see plotted out is basically the difference of that tree cover that we get. And we see particularly in the middle rings, and I suspect that will be similar for other cities, where we have a lot of the existing buildings of the East Coast, single freestanding houses with their backyards. A lot of the development is occurring in those middle rings. So this is where a lot of the infill development is kind of going. And we see obviously here then a massive loss of tree cover that we have. So it goes in some of the regions up to 10% points. So what that means is where we have rough numbers of about 10% tree cover, this might go down to 9% tree cover and things like that. So you have hotspots where it's more obviously areas where you have less. Now, what that means also is if you lose the tree cover, lose the tree green space. Yeah, sorry. It looks like Frankston has a gap in there. Yeah, this is in terms of the data extraction, has been a little bit of an issue. Should have updated those figures. No, I noticed it again. So one of the areas then here is in terms of the land cover change, land surface temperature change. This is what we can see here is the increase of land surface temperature we were expected to see. Now this is now simulated with the land surface temperature model that is available in the scenario tool. And we can see it's quite significant changes in some of the areas where we talk about 3 to 5 degrees increases there. And this is particularly again in those middle suburbs where we find that. So this is now the challenge is kind of how can we actually work with that. Now before that, we'd like to also understand what does it mean in terms of the population, how it impacts the population. So some of the things you might be familiar with the heat vulnerability index. So those things have been assessed, I think, for quite a lot of the Australian cities. Now we have developed an indicator. It's called the heat exposure index. So what that measures, it starts to map out across the city what are the hottest, comparison, what are the hottest areas. So it's basically it shows the quantiles. So that means a heat exposure index of 1, which is the lowest, shows you the bottom 20% of your heat cover of that range that we get in terms of land surface temperature. And heat exposure 5 shows you the highest. Now, I just want to stress here, heat exposure is not the same as the heat vulnerability. So with the heat exposure, we can assess which area are the hottest. And what you then do to get to your heat vulnerability is to intersect that with your demographic of the population. Because just because it's hot doesn't mean you don't have the coping capacity to deal with heat stress, because you might be in a wealthy suburb where you can air conditioning or it's a healthy young population. Whereas in other areas, in some of the poorer suburbs, that might become an issue, particularly around elderly population. So to get from a heat exposure to a heat vulnerability, we need to intersect those data. Now the challenge comes in when we talk about future plan. We can do that for today, for 2018, but if we start to do future planning up to 2051, we obviously don't know how the population, how the demographic is shifting across the city. So across a 30-year horizon, this is obviously a major challenge, and there are major shifts can occur. So this is why we're using at the moment the heat exposure to give us an idea which areas are going to be hotter compared to others relatively. So that means if the heat wave is coming through, those areas are going to experience larger air temperatures, and therefore the population is at a higher risk under those extreme conditions. So these are what it means. And these are the maps that we see then here. So this is then across Melbourne if we start to see map that out. So we can see immediately if you have the development here. So basically, particularly in the urban areas, it's obviously a lot of impervious surfaces. You get the build-up of heat. And this is then going into the well-developed middle suburbs as well, where the heat exposure is usually around 4 and 5. And this is then going down the further we go out. Now, this is not a change if we go from 20 2018 to 2051. So it's not just a more people moving in, which naturally is going to increase the population exposed to extreme heat, but it's also our surfaces that experience much larger temperatures are going to be expanding. And what that means overall is that we're going to see a rapid increase of the population that is going to experience those conditions from today until 2031 until 2051. Now that difference is different depending on where you are in the suburbs, if you're in the central ring of a city or if you're in the middle ring, so that makes a difference there, but it has been significant. Now, one of the elements that we're looking here to do then is kind of if you then start to implement strategies like a 1G per lot policy or 2-3 per lot policy and other strategies, how can you actually start to maintain the current tree cover, or how can you even improve the current situation? And this is what I want to lead now. So this is the type of work that you can do now currently with the scenario tool. Now it is a bit of a challenge to the user interface to do that at large scale, so at the overall metropolitan scale. We're interested in that for a city. There are different ways of how I recommend using the tools. This will be through the backend that we have, the Python interface. But for city council areas and so on, it's possible as well to use it through the user interface. And this is what we would like to discuss with you today. But just a quick pause here. Do you have any questions to that? If not, let's look into what we have today. So basically, to be able to assess extreme heat conditions, we have a lot of, you're seeing that setup of the scenario with a lot of the data there, and then you can run your land surface temperature model on top of it. So we have kind of quite a few exercises on there. And that is really the intention is to work on a larger scale, because obviously the more detailed the models get, the slower they're gonna get. And this is so land surface temperature is relatively quick and works on the large scale. The other element that we have in here is target, which gives us the air temperature. So this works then on your freezing scale quite well, and that also gives you thermal comfort. So basically, from your land surface temperature, the next level down, we can assess air temperature and thermal comfort. And then we also have now this package today that we're going to discuss and give you a bit of an overview, which allows you then, in combination with the land surface temperature, to assess the heat exposure to then ultimately inform heat vulnerability. So what then really allows you to do is kind of bringing it all together is then look today at the city council level, on the largest, you can assess your land surface temperature. You're going to be able to assess your heat exposure index and then also intersect that with the population that is living there, since we have those population data merged into that. But what we also can do now is that we actually simulate how is that evolving and changing into the future. This is where the infill development model comes in. It looks complex, but in the end, the idea is relatively simple behind that. So we have, if you have your land use zoning, so we usually say in Victoria, we have population projections. So some of the government departments at SA2 level, so statistical area 2 level, which is quite large, and I guess that's similar across the states. So what we can do then, based on that level, we know roughly how many people are moving into the, in this case, general residential zone and neighborhood residential zone, and how many kind of move into the activity centers and so on. So these are trends that you can derive out of your current trends. So when you look at the planning permits and so on, out of that you can start to derive those trends. And then for each of those zones, you're able then to do simulate and which percentage of that is going to move into the side-by-side buildings that are quite common, or which are moving into the townhouse buildings or dwellings, and which of those fractions is going to go into apartments. And this is how we can set that up in the model as well. So basically you can add your zoning regulation in there. So we can add your general residential zone, and then say I have 5,000 new households are going to move into this zone, and then let's say 50% of that is going to move into a side-by-side building. So that means 2,500 are going to move into the side-by-side block, And then the model is going to look for parcels that are available, so they have a certain site criteria. So if it's between 600 and 1,500 square meter, for example, then it would develop that. And this is the result that you see here. All of those yellow buildings give you that change in your form, basically. So this is then simulating out, in this case, side-by-side buildings, townhouses, as well as apartment blocks. And when I talk you through the nodes there, you will see we can adjust the typical parameters that you find in your planning guidelines. So site cover, irrigation, number of trees that you would like to put on lots there. And this is what I would like to show you now when we go through the next part through the tutorial. Do you have any questions for this part? Then I will just show you now what is the exercise that I have planned today, and also how we can work with that in the scenario tool. Okay. Now, as we had it before, just the first steps. If you want to follow what we're doing here, so we go on to the website staging.watersensitivecity-scenario.org.au. Again, what you're going to see today, and this is the similar as last time, is a preview of features. They're going to be available through you all soon to work the testing process. So you might have seen there was an expression of interest for some further testing as well. As soon as this is completed, then this product is going to be available for all of you to be used. If you're interested in that, you can have a go with the demo account during the training sessions. For us, the purpose of this is really to collect some early feedback from you. So it's going to be take notes about things that we could improve or use cases that you would like to try. And then you can get in touch with us and we can improve the tool accordingly. So there are a few elements then here also, since it is currently in the testing phase, if it's a beta version, there might be some clunky patches for the tool, so apologies for that. If you have not registered yet, you can simply register here, and then I'm gonna bump up your account then just in a few minutes when I walk you through here. And then you can basically log into the tool as we had it before. I'm just going to open up one of the, another note, the documentation you find under box/staging watersensitivity.org.au. There's a link to that in the invite. And this is also where you find the material to today's trainings seminar. So this is training 5, City of Kingston. And this is basically walking you through that step by step. As we had it before in the other trainings as well, if you missed it and don't have time to go through that today, we were going to record the session and then you can replay that and try it then yourself if you like. Now, the training itself has 2 parts. So first, we're going to explore the heat exposure of the City of Kingston as well. So the idea behind that is to be able to just use the tool at a larger scale to start to interrogate what is happening on those areas. There's a bit of a warning. It takes about, since this is a really large area, it takes about 20 minutes for the model to initialize. So just going to put that on mute. Another registration is coming in. Sorry for that. Okay. Now then we use the tool to explore what is the current situation and the current context, let's say in the City of Kingston. And you can do, just as a note there as well, the heat exposure tool is currently only available for the Melbourne region. In the other regions we are setting that up, but you can use that also in other councils in Melbourne to try and explore and see if it works with your data. Now, in the next time, we're going to then explore a scenario, a fictive scenario, where we are exploring what the impact would be into 2051. And we're going to use the 2 nodes here. We're looking at land surface temperature and heat exposure. And then what we're going to do, we're going to increase the population that we had in in that area that you see here, so it's a smaller area, but we're going to increase it by roughly 70,000 people or 7,000 households. We do that with different developments, and then look at the impact between a business as usual and the maintained scenario with one additional tree per lot. And for this scenario, we're then looking at the general residential zone and putting in different developments, side-by-side, townhouse or apartment developments, and then explore the results for that. Again, those models are probably at a bit larger scale as we have used before. So the computational burden is a bit higher, so they're going to be a little bit slower. So it takes a bit of more time to run them if you try that yourself. But it gives a bit of an idea and also shows the capabilities of what can be done at a larger scale. Now, there's also, as usual, we have here a link to the Dropbox folder where you find the case study boundaries, as well as the small case study boundary, as well as the general residential zoning in there. You can use other zoning to store it up as well if you like. This is another way of using it, but it gives you a bit of an idea and a starting point for that. Now let's look at the City of Kingston scenario first. I'll just show you how you set it up, and then I have pre-worked the results already, because as I said, it's going to take a little bit of time to run. So we're going to go on to staging what is in City view. So this is where I find the tool. Now it just set up, so with the plus button, you create a new project. Say this is City of Kingston now. For the regions, so as I said, the heat exposure model is available at the moment, and they're only limited to Melbourne, but we're going to make that available for the other regions as well. Land surface temperature works across those regions. So let's pick Melbourne as a case study. Next, then we pick the land surface temperature model. Depending on your account, you might see different nodes here. I have a few test nodes here. So don't get distracted by them. They're just under development at the moment. But what is the more important one is the land surface temperature node, and then we have the heat exposure node here as well. If we click on that, you need, for the heat exposure node, you're gonna need the land surface temperature node. Otherwise, that's not gonna go, just as a note here. You could run also target. I don't recommend it to do it on those large scales because it's going to take a really long time to finish. On the smaller scale ones, this is definitely possible, and then you also get impacts on heat surface temperature. Okay, just a question. The kind of question about if you can use it in Perth during the beta phase. I think we have, I just double checked, but I think we have set up the land surface temperature model as well as target should be available for Perth. We're just exploring at the moment how to add it to the outer heat exposure index to that as well. And our testing group that we have is also looking across those different regions, so we can ensure that it's working well across those regions. So we have all those data uploaded and available there. Okay, that's that question. Yeah, if you have currently if you have just registered, you only have the demo account. And in the demo version, it's only the land surface temperature model is available. Target and the heat exposure, I would need to bump up your access for that. I'm gonna do that in a couple of minutes. So as soon as that project is initializing, you're gonna bump up your access. So if there's an issue, just put it into the chat window. You're gonna find your username, add the access to that. Let's go into the, now here's the typical, we can upload the scenario. So we're just gonna go upload here. If you click into that box, it's gonna tell you, you can open a folder, you can just drag and drop it in. In this case, it's a data pack for this area. I hope you can all download that with the area of Kingston. Here it's always important, make sure then the coordinate system is set to the right. So this is part of the documentation that's stated in this BSG 4236 is the same that we use for GPS coordinates. Otherwise, it won't recognize the area. So if you drag and drop an area in and it's not showing up, then that will not work. Now you can see here the outline. I will just press confirm, and the model is gonna run and send it off. So what that does is, as before, it pulls the data out of the GSK datasets, builds the integrated model, also adds AWS census data to that, climate data, and so on. So it's bringing all that information together. And it depends a little on which performance assessment model you choose, which data you're going to see the dashboard. As said before, this is going to take about 20 minutes for that model to initialize. So if you run that, it's going to take a little bit of time. Also here, note, just going to see what those access levels are. Give you a bit more access here. We have quite a few computers available at the moment, but there is still, if you're all going to run Kingston, it's definitely going to be a bit of a load on our system here. Let me just check. So if you have just registered, you should have more access now to the tools. If you reload the website, you should have access now to run the land surface temperature as well. Okay. Okay. Now let's look at the calculation that we got. So let's just look at something that we have done earlier. So you can, if you run a scenario, you can just leave it, close the website, and can come back later on, so that they're still going to be processed in the background. And I hope that's the right one now. Okay. So what we see here now, this was the two nodes that we used here is, as I said, the land surface temperature node and the heat exposure node. And we are working on at the moment, it's displaying just all the data. So you can decide, you can remove layers. So in this case, let's just look how the model looks at the moment. So we have, if we zoom in further, there should be buildings starting to pop up. So this is basically now all the area of Kingston City Council. When we run that, we're gonna get info as well about current, the current land cover. So if you're interested in that, what it should display as default is your tree cover information. Now. So we're gonna see that. The first time it always takes a little bit of time to load the tiles, but after that, that's a bit better. Sometimes you don't see the graphs that are under the map. You just need to scroll down if they're not visible. What we see then down there is the typical the land surface temperature model that we have. We see then the land surface temperature distribution that we have across the area. So we can see 20% of the area are below 40%. The exposure land surface temperature is above 56%. So this is just the graph gives you that information. We see summary statistics about the various areas as well. So land cover information, probably the interesting ones are always around tree cover. So in this case, we have a 9% tree cover across all of it. And then household information, so how many people are living in the catchment at the moment. And then I'm gonna come back to the heat exposure of the population in the next step. Let's explore those results a bit further. So as we see, if we start to map out the land surface temperature that has been measured on, I think it was on February 2012, on an extreme heat day during the day. That's why those temperatures are quite large. And it is the surface temperature. But you can see quite nicely coming out the water bodies, obviously, which are much cooler, and then you have The urban form is obviously quite, so everything that's built up is obviously quite hot, particularly around the airport. And then here we have a few industrial areas as well, so like industrial activities in here. If we remove the land surface temperature, you can see all those here, in those commercial areas. There's obviously then the other thing to go here. That yellow highlighting here, this is when the area has been selected. So this is the case study area. Disable that for now. Now the other element, this is now interesting to look at, is the, so as I said, we have the land surface temperature and across the council area. So we can start to interrogate that, but then also the heat exposure mapping. The heat exposure mapping, now this is mapped out on a, the heat exposure mapping is now done at a SA1 level, so statistical area 1 level. And this is also the same as we look at the population data from the ABS, and it's taking the average temperature on that. So basically what we can see here is now the rating from 1 to 5, and we see set up let's be slightly transparent. Now what you find is, although in some of the more industrial areas, the statistical area is extended with obviously quite some large green spaces. It will show up that high. But we can see here quite nicely, this industrial area is coming up with heat exposure of 5. And also here in this area, we see it's quite highly developed. And also when we start to zoom in, this was the picture that I took at the start. It shows some of those infill developments that have quite some problematic outcomes in terms of tree cover loss, and also then in terms of the increase of surfaces that contribute to the land surface temperatures, particularly here developments like that. There's not a single green space left. And this comes now through also in these heat exposure settings, where basically we have quite large areas here that have been quite densely populated with a big loss of tree cover and green space, then that would lead to a higher heat exposure. And now as well, there's some statistics at the end, which then is also mapping the number of people living in those areas, depending on that heat exposure index. So we can see the majority is in area 4 to area 5. So this is the idea that we have. This is basically the distribution that we get here around that. When we zoom out again, we can see obviously that the majority of the population is living in those zones. Yeah, so this is basically just in terms of what you can explore. This is what you can do at the moment with just two base models with the data that are available in your tool. You can start to map that out and then just have a look around, see what do you find. What is always interesting then as well is starting to link this information together, for example, with the tree cover. So if you start to map that out, you can actually see that your tree base will get high heat exposure and so on. So that explains those relationships. And where you have large water bodies moving through, you obviously get those effects of cooling. But this is one way of how you can start to use those land surface temperature data and also to help you to interpret those results. Do you have any questions to that? I see there's still a few issues in terms of giving you access. It's probably difficult to sort that out quite now. I might need to look into that if there's any way. And this particular issue around the other regions in Brisbane and Perth, I will need to look into. That. And as I said, the heat exposure mapping, this is at the moment only fully functional in Melbourne. Also, as a side note, in terms of data, what it is using the geoscape data. If you don't have a license for that, you can use it for demonstration purpose, but you are not to take actual insights out of those data. This is why we also, after the seminar, so we leave it open for a couple of days, but then we reduce the access level to the tool then again as well. Okay. Now, let's look into, if you don't have any questions to that, let's have a look at how we can simulate the infill development. Now, I'm gonna open up a project that I have. So just basic, the beta setup process again is the same. Looking at the smaller area now of Kingston. Melbourne. Next. Just in terms of time, I'm just using land surface temperature model at the moment, but you could also use target at that scale as well if you're interested in that. The exposure, upload the map. Now, for this area here, we find case study area small. This is what we have set up for that. Okay, open, confirm, and submit. Oh, okay, now this should be running. I hope so it's not too busy, otherwise it might take a little time. If you have also submitted simulations, you might be out of runtime at the moment. No, it's coming in. Okay, 2%. Now I have prepared one earlier that I would like to show you now. I have quite a few projects in here. There's more my testing projects. Let me check. How big is this one? I had it open beforehand. All right. Now, before I look around and find a clean one, project that has a few test data in it, but I hope it's not too distracting. But I'll just give you the idea. So this is basically the area that we had before. Okay. I've added also here the general residential zone. So you can add new data. If you click on the plus button here, add new areas, you can upload the general residential zone here that is has been provided as part of the data pack. So that is extracted out of the zone codes that we have in Melbourne. Now, this is basically helps us to identify where our population should move. So in this case, we want to pack in 7,000 more households into this particular area. You can also set that up to respond to different zone codes. So you can have a neighborhood residential zone, general residential zone, or you can go to commercial zones to use that. The next step in preparation is if you want to now create this scenario. Let's say I create a new one. It's a business as usual scenario and start to set up and want to simulate that development. So I want to derive that scenario from the baseline and confirm. Okay. Jump in. Baseline setup. Click another one. Good. So this is now where you can set up your scenarios. There's a little bit of information as well on the side to help you with some of the guidance if you need that. Now, we want to first say, so in terms of the, if you go to documentation, I just want to open that side by side. Okay. So what we want to simulate now is basically 7,000 new households, 3,000 are gonna go into side by side, 2,000 into townhouses, and 2,000 into apartments. workflow node, you can see on the side there are the different categories, and there we have pre-populated them with the urban form nodes. Now we started to create templates for those, particularly for the business as usual work as well. And then we're also working now towards the catalog that IRP4 has released, to also being able to integrate the those research outputs and as well as those parameters, so you can choose them and see what the difference will be. In this case, we have available now here the townhouse development side by side and the apartment developments. The subdivision node itself is used if you need something more general purpose, then you can use the subdivision node. But let's look at a first setup that we selected side by side node. All those nodes follow a similar structure. We choose the area, we're going to apply the nodes. In this case, we have side-by-side developments within the general residential zone here. If you're, in this case, we see the general residential zone is not cut with the case study boundary, but that has no impact on the modeling results or anything. So if it's, yeah, so that's fine. Now, development is going to ask you for the additional number of households you would like to put in. Now, the model is driven by how many more residential units or apartments do you need. So this is basically by knowing how the number of households, this is how many of those residential units we need to create. Depending on where you are, good rule of thumb is a household has on average 2.5 people, so it gives a bit of an idea. In this case, we say we want to have 3,000 more people moving in here. Now you can have here some of the parameters that you can set. So the parcel width is going to tell you now it's looking at individual parcels. If they are within a certain size, between 600 and 1,500 square meter, it's going to try to split that parcel in half. If the width that is remaining of the individual lot is above 7 meters. So you find that. Then you can set other like building height, set coverage, and how many units you're going to get per apartment there, per house in this case. Then further on, it's going to ask you how much of the remaining site cover. So basically, in this case, 60% is going to be building. So we have 40% left. Out of those 40%, 40% itself is going to be hard stand. So this is your driveways, concrete, and so on. There we have and walkways. And then of the remaining 100% is going to be irrigated as well. Usually, we don't change much with those parameters. In terms of heat response, they also usually don't have much of an impact there as well. What has more of an impact is then when we look into trees. Now, for the business as usual, with scenario, we said that we don't have any trees on lot, for example. And you can also set a compliance level. So how many of those newly developed apartments are going to install that tree if they put one in? And we can set up from 0 up to, I think, 4 trees are supported. So up to 4 trees, and then you can set the tree canopy size. There's an advanced option further down that looks a bit critical. But if you look at that, it's what's important with that one, and we're gonna try to daylight it a little bit in the user interface. But at the moment, if you're able to control which parcels should be preferred by those side-by-side developments, and this scenario, we can go in and say if the area is between 600 and 1,500 square meters, it should consider those parcels. If a parcel is outside that, then this should be not a part of the development. So you can change those here if you like. Now, if you're finished, we can now add the other nodes there as well. So in this case, same procedure for the townhouse as well as for the apartment nodes. Just add that here. Townhouse, I leave all the parameters the same, but just change it to the number of trees per lot. What comes in, what is different from the townhouse node to the side-by-side node is that the subdivision has an additional parameter depth in there, where you then can have either say a lot of say 800 square meters, for example. You might find that there are 5 or 6 individual townhouses packed onto those, so you can simulate that with that. So basically it tries to split that parcel, not just along its along as with the side by side, but also across as well. So if we reduce that, for example, 12 meters, make those a little bit higher. Let's see, there are 3-story townhouses, and yeah, we run those. So usually those parameters you find in your should quite closely align with also what is possible in terms of the zoning regulations that they have in place anyway, as well as the distribution of how much goes into side-by-side townhomes and apartments. You can see those on your current planning permits, for example. You can derive that information based on that. And then the rest is then we're gonna, what we haven't said is how many people in the households we need. We need about 2,000 in here. And then for the last one, for the apartment blocks, we need 2,000 as well. And 0 trees, as well, 0 trees as well, yeah. And here I want to change the parameter to be that this is go up to 2,000 square meter, up parcels to 1,000. So between 1,000 and 2,000 square meter lots have a better chance to get developed. How the model works itself, it is you're just randomly distributing this population now based on those criteria that we have set. So basically 2,000 people should move into new apartment buildings here. For apartment blocks, the population of the resident or the yield that you get per lot is calculated based on the building footprint and the height of the building, assuming that one on average, a unit is going to be 75 square meters. Okay, but we can, is it needed? And we apply that to the general residential zone. If you run a more, obviously you have more finer grained land use codes, for example, or obviously different ones as well. You can just follow a similar procedure for all the other nodes as well. And what you can do is you can mix and match that with the residential nodes that we had in previous examples. Let's say if you play a scenario, which is not going to be likely, but let's say if you remove the airport and fill it up with residential apartments, you could draw that up and use the residential node to simulate that. As soon as that's finished, we press run, and then I said it's going to take some time to calculate those. So it's roughly about it's a few minutes, up to 5 minutes, I think, until that is finished. What you can do, you can set up one scenario, and in parallel, as soon as this is working, you can set up the other scenario in parallel to that as well. Now let's look at some of the results that we have done earlier. So set up a business as usual node as we have it here. Just gonna make that highlight go right. Okay, so this was the same parameters that we had, 3,000, 2,000, and 2,000. Now let's look at the buildings. So what you then get is here starts to populate the scenario with new buildings. I'm not an urban planner, so it's just the massing of the buildings. So it's really only visualizing the side cover. That's why they always look a little bit like we're saying like parking lots. But it is the massing is the correct one. If you then visualize here, for example, the build here, so you can go on buildings built here, and then you see all the yellow buildings. This has been basically populated by this residential development nodes. What you can do here is now you can see already here the dual occupancy, since we have the most number of people moving in, most number of households moving into those, and also they have the lowest yields because it just split it in half and you get only two residential units instead of one, whereas for townhouses or apartments, obviously get way more. This is why it starts to, you can see it filling up with those units. Now you can change those weightings. Basically, if you can just explore what would happen if I pack 5,000 people into the apartments and only 2,000 into townhouses. How that would affect that. Now you can start to explore and see here we have a few apartments as well as townhouses. Same for the maintain scenario. So it's kind of the urban form is going to look the same as we had it before. As I said, the placement is, so picks, the passes are randomized to picks, so it's not going to be exactly the same layout, but overall, statistically, it's going to be the same. What we have here as well then in that scenario is that we added trees, so you can visualize those trees as well. see how that would look like. In this case, we would assume that we have a tree per new development that is coming in. Now we can actually start to compare those scenarios to each other. So this is more interesting. So please ignore here that noise. Unfortunately, I picked the wrong one here. But we can see here if we compare, we have the baseline. So this is as it is today. And if we compare that to the business as usual one, let's compare all those scenarios to the business as usual one. So we can see under the business as usual scenario, we get overall on average a 0.32 increase of land surface temperature. And if we would apply a maintain scenario where we have 1 tree on lot, we have a 1.173 reduction there. We can do similar things where we can compare the distributions that we get here of the land surface temperature, then as well where we can see then where we get the highest increase of temperature. I think what is more interesting is starting to look into the tree cover loss. So if we compare those to each other, if we compare that to the baseline, we can see that under disable all those. Just focus on the ones that are running. That's the key. Sorry, it doesn't stick. You can see for the business as usual one, we have a roughly 3% point loss. So that means we go from, we had roughly 9% points on average, we're going down to 7% points over the whole catchment. Here you can see some statistics around the population. So we obviously should see the increase in some summary statistics as well. And we're able to visualize that. If you do the comparison, you can visualize your, you want to add a new comparison. You want to compare the tree cover change between the business as usual compared to our baseline. Confirm. Now you can see that. So this gives you basically, on average, those losses are usually don't seem to be that high, but if you start to zoom into those areas, you can obviously see them where you had quite a lot of development. There is quite a significant loss of tree cover. So particularly, I think in those areas, yeah, you can see that we have a lot of new buildings would have been placed in here. Without that, that would have been originally, I guess, quite a significant tree cover there. Yeah, so this is what that model basically highlights you and gives you. And we can also do the same and compare that to your land surface temperature difference then as well at that scale. So we want to compare the business as usual. We just have developed to our baseline, confirm, and then we can look at the land surface temperature change here. And obviously where we have the highest tree cover loss, this is then also going to be where we see the highest increase. So locally, those increases can be quite large. Now, in the last step, what I would like to show you before we wrap up is then we can also visualize then, as we had it before. If you're not familiar with that sidebar here, this shows the individual layers of the scenarios. In the drop-down menu, you can change between the scenarios, and then we can look at this case. Let's look at the heat exposure index. I'm not sure if you actually see a change here. Let's compare it to the baseline. Any change? No. I think the area does not necessarily extend in this. I think we see a little bit more up here. I'm not quite sure. This is something that we're going to build in as functionality as well, to have the comparison between the different heat exposures there. And if we go further down, we can see the effect of the population there as well. So we see them here under the we basically see under the business as usual scenario, particularly in the area 5, which is the highest one, we see that we see that increase of population exposed to heat. Whereas then in the zone 4, we see the increase in the maintain, but that means population has shifted from the highest heat exposure to the zone 4. So this will be basically the scenario, and I think by now, yeah, so this you can see it takes a little bit of time to run it, particularly on the server side. That's a little bit busy to finish. But it gives a bit of an overview of how you can start to work with different land use zones, different building typologies, how they're put in, and then also what that would mean in terms of changes in terms of tree cover loss, land surface temperature. You can also look into changes of impervious areas, so you get that as well, which is then what we're going to discuss in the next seminar around how that relates to your water cycle assessments, and then how those changes are going to affect your yeah, how the infill is going to affect basically what can you do in terms of with different building typologies, and then also later, obviously, then the role that water-sensitive infrastructure can play in that. The steps from here is that, as you said, that we're going to integrate more and more of the research outputs that are coming through, particularly before is developing building typologies that we're going to put into here as well. If you have a particular need to have, so those build forms are, a lot of it is based on work that is in Victoria, or has happened in Victoria. If it is quite different in your particular region, let us know, and then we can work out what those parameters might be and also make them available in a more straightforward way through the user interface if that's interesting. As I see, so this is typical scale now that it can work with. It also works on the overall council. Just is a bit takes a bit longer to run those scenarios. Don't recommend it to run it for all of your entire city. It can be done, but I said that requires a little bit of a different way of how you can access the model. Would be everything, I think, for today from my side. Do you have any questions? We're still all working on the model. So you're going to send out a survey in a couple of days as well, just to collect some feedback. If you notice anything going wrong during the work meeting or something is a bit clunky, let us know and get in touch with us, and then we can work through those as well, through those issues. Also, I think some of your regions, this is what we need to look into, that you have access to all those nodes. I think that was not quite as straightforward yet. All right. Yeah, thanks, Greg. I'm gonna update your login and give you access so you can have a proper play around with it. In terms of usability, there are a few things that we know is now since we use it more as well that we're gonna polish up a little bit, but we hope that is a step forward from the earlier version as well. It's definitely much more improved in terms of stabilities and so on that we had. So we have not seen any crashes in the user interface yet. Okay. Thank you, and I wish you all then good break over Christmas and over the new year. And then it's going to be exciting in February. We're going to run the next seminar, and this is going to be focusing then on the water cycle element. So this is where we actually start to close that cycle and bring all those elements together. If you have some special requests about seminar ideas, what you would look at, some case studies that we can explore through that, just get in touch with us. I'm more than happy to just explore different areas as well. Okay. Thank you all. Bye.